It's great to be here with you all. It's good to see so many familiar faces, some new faces here, and it's an honor for me and my organization, MEDA, to sponsor this event. I think that MEDA, which stands for Mennonite Economic Development Associates, and Messiah College, and specifically the Messiah College Business Program, have a lot in common. And I'd like to introduce kind of a gist of what we do with about a 1.5-minute long video.
The world is full of people, lots of people, and there are more of us every single day. But for all those people that show up, many don't have access to education, medical care, and they don't have much to eat. In fact, 1 in 5 people live on less than $1.25 a day. 1 in 2 live on less than $2.50 a day. And 4 in 5 live on less than $10 each day. MEDA's working to change this. But it's not about just giving money. And it's not about just giving aid. At MEDA, we think aid leads to dependence, and dependence doesn't create lasting change. Instead, we build access to financial services for businesses, rural areas, and youth. Use technology to connect entrepreneurs to growing markets. Provide health products to populations in need. And encourage women to start their own businesses. By making long-term financial investments in our clients' dreams, we share the risks with those we serve. It is through our willingness to help those in need that we enable individuals to get involved in our association of supporters. By empowering women, men, and youth around the world to strive towards stronger livelihoods for their family and their community, MEDA generates sustainable solutions. In a world of 7 billion people, where overwhelming poverty and growing inequalities exist, MEDA understands that change happens best from within, working with local partners and empowering entrepreneurs. MEDA, creating business solutions to poverty. It's what we do every day.
Thank you, Jay. If we could just go back to our mission statement. So I really enjoy working for MEDA because of the approach that we take to poverty reduction in the world. And I think it's something that we all in this room understand and know, and that's business. We've been around, MEDA has been around for a little over 60 years. We started doing microfinance work in Central and South America back in the 50s. And have expanded to over, we've helped 42 million families in the last 2 years, which is just amazing. And the way that we do that is through a really technical approach using business strategies to solve a problem that's a real problem in this world. You know, it's something that a lot of people are aiming to fix. And this is the approach that we think is sustainable. It uses our expertise in business and management and finance and investments to do God's work in the world. So our mission statement, as an association of Christians, faithful in daily work and committed to sharing abilities and resources, we create business solutions to poverty. And that's something that we're really proud of. And our vision that through that mission, we can share God's love through our work in economic development, investments, finance, and business, so that all people can experience God's love and reach their full potential in life. So I think that it goes without saying that Messiah Business students, Messiah Business alums, and Mennonite Economic Development Associates, or MEDA, have a lot in common, and I think that it was a great opportunity for us to sponsor this event, and especially because of our friend Alex Hartzler, who's speaking here this morning, who is an integral part of what MEDA does on an impact investing level. And to tell you a little bit more about that, I'm going to invite Dave Warren, who's the Chief Engagement Officer at MEDA, also a Messiah fanatic, to introduce Alex this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. Well, it is really exciting to be here with you this morning. Many of us at MEDA are proud of our connections to Messiah College and root for Messiah's success in multiple arenas, not just on the soccer field, but everywhere, but certainly including the soccer field. And we're happy to see how things went this past weekend for the soccer, for the women especially, and the men both. I want to say that it is a real privilege to be here this morning. We're really excited about the program. But the arena I'm currently excited for Messiah in, I'm rooting for John Chopka and the admissions staff to successfully convince my oldest daughter that going to college 2 miles from home would be really cool. It may be a challenge. Anyway, it's our privilege this morning to introduce Alex Hartzler. Alex is a board member at MEDA. Alex is a lawyer by training, and he is currently managing partner of WCI Partners, a real estate investment fund where his primary focus is on urban real estate development projects, including adaptive reuse, restoration, and conversion of urban structures. Following the sale of his company Web Clients, Inc. in 2005, where he was a partner and general counsel, he continues to advise several internet marketing and technology companies. Alex is a former Fulbright scholar, but he's so deeply involved in MEDA's work that people sometimes wonder how he finds time to do his day job. He travels extensively to explore multiple bottom-line investments in agriculture, green energy, and low-income housing. He was a founding investor in Microvest, co-owned by MEDA, a commercial microfinance fund that has grown from $12 million in assets in 2004 to more than $300 million today. He is chair also of the board at Sorna Asset Management, another company co-owned by MEDA, which focuses on the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector in order to deliver returns for people, planet, and profit. Alex appreciates MEDA as a vehicle for him to apply his specialized expertise to help others. He says, as millions of people seize the opportunity to improve their lives through application of business principles and capital infusion, they're driving tremendous positive change throughout emerging markets and around the world. Known for his sartorial commitment to blue jeans as a fashion statement. I can't tell if those are jeans or not, Alex, but they are? Okay. Alex enjoys running, golf, politics, travel, and driving his Tesla Roadster. Now, if you really want to make him smile this morning, you should ask him about his new son, Julian. So, Alex, would you please come?
Thank you, David, for that very kind introduction. I probably wouldn't be here with you today but for MEDA, and I'll just take one word. I've been on the board of MEDA for 8 years. Next year is my 9th and final year on the board. But in addition to doing a few small projects for MEDA while I was an attorney with Buchanan Ingersoll, Gerhard Priest, who is the former CFO of MEDA, some of you in the room know Gerhard, he happened to call me. He had great timing. Right around the time we were selling our company in 2005, and said, Alex, what are you doing with, excuse me, what are you doing with the rest of your life? And I said, well, it's a good question. I've been thinking about that. He said, well, you should come join MEDA and learn about impact investing. He said, I want your talents, and I want both your talents. I want your gold, and I want your time. And it's very impactful for me, and Gerhard and MEDA have got me involved around the world in applying business principles to solve poverty. And I like to think that what we're going to talk about today is the local version of that. And Gerhard and MEDA have inspired me to make change through business. There's lots of ways to make change in the world, and we can do that every day. But I know a lot of folks in this room, and certainly myself, I know business. So we're hopefully going to make change through business. That's what MEDA does, and they've been doing it for, 60 years, I think, since this original Sorna dairy in Paraguay. So I'm very pleased that to be part of MEDA, and thank you very much for sponsoring. I also want to say a couple special thanks here before I jump in. First of all, I want to say to my team at WCI, Dave Butcher, who's been my partner since 2007, Lori Fortini, and I tease Lori and her sister Danita. Lori's also a Mennonite like me. I said, you're always a Mennonite, so once a Mennonite, always a Mennonite. Thank you, Lori, for your good work with us. Annika just joined us, so thank you all. If I say I statements this morning, it's really we, because the reason I have time to participate with Sorona and MEDA is because I have a great team in Harrisburg that really does most of the work. So don't be confused by that. I also want to mention, I think I saw Jason Webb. I know I saw Jason Webb because I talked to him. Jason, where are you? Jason's back. Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Jason, his two former partners, Wendell Hoover and Josh Shonley, three Messiah guys who were very instrumental in helping to really form the basis of Old Uptown, what we're going to talk about today in Harrisburg. And, but for those guys, probably wouldn't also be here today. So thank you, and it's a great Messiah connection. But before we get started, I have a pop quiz, so make sure you're all awake. Okay? So now some of you have heard this before. Now, a few facts and figures about Harrisburg. Okay? So who can tell me the population of Harrisburg? Population of the city, yes, sir. 49,000. That is correct. Very well done. Does anyone know the population of the overall region of Central Pennsylvania? Chris Price, you cannot answer. You've heard this speech. What's the population of the region? Okay, Chris Price. No. From Carlisle to Hershey. MSA, yes. 600,000. That's correct. 600,000. And if you know, this is a good table right here. You know what the rank nationally is for the region of 600,000? What's our rank nationally?
About somewhere in the 90s, I believe.
We're a lot better than that. 51. 51st in the nation. Does anyone know that the region or the city is one higher than us? Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay. Think about it. Okay. Now, that's where we live. We live in a city of 49,000 and a region of 600,000. So the city we're going to talk about today is less than 10% of the region that we live in. Okay. Anyone, now we're going to focus a little bit on real estate. Can anyone tell me what the percentage of home ownership is in Dauphin County? Percentage of ownership. It's actually the same as it is in the United States. How many people own their homes? Anyone know this? Yes. Oh, it's a different table. Different table. Who knows? Just say it. 65%. That's right. In the United States, 65%. It reached a high of 68%. Does anyone know what the percentage of home ownership is in the city of Harrisburg? 35%. Basically flipped. Most of the nation in Dauphin County, 65% owned, 35% rent. In Harrisburg, it's exactly the opposite. 35% owned, 65%. Does anyone tell me the percentage of school children in the Harrisburg School District that are considered disadvantaged, meaning that they receive subsidized federal lunches, breakfast? What percentage? Yes, sir. That's correct. This is a very sharp crowd. Most they give this lecture, there's zeros all across the board. This is almost 100%. That's right. You want to know what the median income in Harrisburg is? Median income for a family. 35, 32. You're a little bit high. It's actually 26,900 in Harrisburg. Does anyone know what the U.S. median income is? Or in Pennsylvania, it's about the same. I heard 50,000 is correct. Pennsylvania is 49,000, and the nation as a whole is right around 50,000. So Harrisburg City median income is about 1/2 than it is in Pennsylvania and the rest of the country. Now, one more statistic: racial makeup of Dauphin County. You want to tell me what the percentage of white African American and Latino is in Dauphin County? Also, some of them here are in the United States. Anyone can tell me that? 85% white, 11% African American, 4% other Hispanic. In Harrisburg, again, that's reversed. 55% African American, 30% white, about 50% Hispanic, and 4% Asian. So we're talking about a region that looks very much like the United States, and a city that looks very different. And it's very different. That's what we're going to talk about this morning, about the context for where you're doing this work. I want to make 3 points this morning, 3 takeaways. I'll just touch on them now, and then we'll come back to them in the breakout session discussion. And just to keep in mind, 3 points. My thesis today is you can have a dramatic impact through investing in your local community. Impact investing works. Okay? Think about that. And we're going to talk about that. The second thing I want to talk about and want you to take away this morning is that urban areas in this country are ascendant. We know that. Anyone who's been in New York City in the 80s, has been in New York City last week, knows there's been a big difference between New York City in the 80s or 70s and New York City today. Also Philadelphia. We don't have to go too far away to Baltimore, Washington, D.C. Urban areas are ascendant. Why is that? Why are urban areas ascendant? There's many reasons, but they have to do with environment. People like to live closer to where they work. People are concerned about the environment, not energy costs are higher. They're also more comfortable with diversity. It's also the creative economy, where people, it's spontaneity of living in an urban environment where ideas are exchanged on a day-to-day basis, and it's there's growth both socially and business-wise in urban areas. And the good news today is that Harrisburg is not immune to those national trends. We may think that Harrisburg is immune to those national trends that favor urban areas, but that is in fact not the case. Those things are actually happening here. And the final point, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is that in Harrisburg, and Dave and I talk about this regularly, we often say we're caught in the middle. What do you mean by caught in the middle? Well, in Central PA, we have a very strong, let's say, conservative political establishment in the suburbs. We have a very strong liberal establishment in the city. And the suburban, some suburban power structures would say, why invest in the city? Those people there don't look like us, they don't talk like us, whatever. Why Hartzler are you interested in building cities? Just leave it alone. On the contrast, there's some power structures in the urban areas that like things as they are too, because they're tied into that. And so trying to do business in the city, some of those folks in the city are actually anti-commerce. We don't want commerce here. So there's all we're caught in the middle. My view is you can do both. You can do business to achieve success in our urban areas and in Harrisburg. So we'll talk about that. So I want to talk a little bit about Old Uptown, and as an example, and I'm going to put this again in the this is not to talk about just WCI or what we've done. It's about an example of what change can happen through patient capital, through a focus on sustainability, and things like that. And we hope it's an example that will inspire others. So, Old Uptown Historic Neighborhood Revitalization Project. This is, again, we started with Wendell Hoover and Jason Webb and some others in 2005. Now, just to show you where we're working, some folks might remember that in this event here in this room. This is the Agnes flood of 1972. This is the Governor's Mansion. This is McClay Street and Front Street. Why do we put that up as the first slide? One of the things that you have to understand about Harrisburg is that it was much like the other cities in central Pennsylvania in the 50s and 60s that experienced urban flight. The suburbs were growing after World War II. A lot of whites fled to the suburbs. Harrisburg had a unique thing that happened, and that was the flood. So all the folks along Front Street and 2nd Street, or whatever, who were still there, they got their FEMA checks, and they moved out. 35 years later, this is a situation that we found in Harrisburg in 2005 when we started working here. I want to say one more thing about the contours of Old Uptown. So Old Uptown, when we talk about Old Uptown, we're talking about the area between McClay Street to the north, Minnick Street to the south, being Front Street, and then 3rd Street's back in here. There's about 300 tax parcels, 330 tax parcels in that area. But if you think in terms of Katrina just happened a few years ago in New Orleans, how long is it going to take them to recover? Honestly, this area of Harrisburg sat there for 35 plus years, and this was the condition. The average property value when we started was about $30,000. So 337 tax parcels, 80% or more in need of substantial repair. We had vacant, abandoned properties, absentee landlords, rampant drug trafficking, vandalism, graffiti, loitering, disinvestment in the neighborhood. There's a little, you probably can't see this in the back, but it says "More Murda." Was a graffiti there. The corner of Green and Minnick Streets, which you may know today, is the home of Little Amps, and I'll touch on that in a bit. Green and Minnick was known as Green and Murder because of the multiple murders that had taken place on that corner. That street, just a few blocks from the Capitol. So again, here's the outline of Old Uptown. Governor's Mansion is here. The 2nd Street, Green. So that's right on 3rd. And this is Minnick Street. So this is the corner right here I'm talking about. Green and Minnick Street right here. This street, Minnick Street, which is the one way coming off of 2nd, was one of the most major drug streets in the city of Harrisburg in 2005. We can tell you lots of stories just around that, but I'll just tell one quick one. When we started, Dave and I would go out and pick up trash basically every day. You know, it's a good thing to do, pick up trash. And the drug dealers were hanging there. They'd kind of shuffle away. We were there, and sometimes they would shuffle right up and sell drugs right into a car, right in front of us. Wasn't a big deal. So one week, a friend of mine who was living there in the neighborhood came up to me and said, "Alex, they know who you are." I'm like, "Who knows who I am?" "The dealers. They know who you are." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he said, they're not happy with you. You're hurting their business. Be careful." And 2 weeks later, I got bricks through my house at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, you know, it's one of those times in life where since he had warned me, I got my golf clubs out. I put them next to my bed. And at that moment, I thought, well, you know, if someone's coming through my front window with a gun, those golf clubs would not be too useful. Fortunately, they didn't. And we went out and bought more properties the next week. But that really was one of the worst streets in the city. And interestingly enough, and this is important, they weren't Harrisburg City residents who were doing the buying. Okay, we parked a cop car on that corner, and for several months arrested people who went to, there was a little corner store there. And lots of people were arrested. Well, where were they from? They were from the East Shore, the West Shore. They were out-of-state plates coming to a little convenience store at Green and Minnick Street, driving in because this was a known regional drug street in the city of Harrisburg. You have to understand that was what was going on. Okay. One more thing about the area. Why did we choose this area? And this was important as far as is this project replicable? So on 3 sides of the map, we had things that were a little bit better. To the south is Midtown. Most of the homes have been revitalized. To the north, also larger homes along 2nd Street, more intact, and then we had the river. To the east, across 3rd Street, not so much. But we had a distinct area where we felt like if we could really concentrate our efforts, we could make improvement. So that's what we started. We started with $5 million of equity from my partners from the sale of web clients. And the concept, I should back up a second. Full disclosure, when we started this wasn't necessarily a community development project. We thought we were going to make a lot of money. In 2005, you'll recall that real estate industry was booming. People were buying and selling homes. Thought, we'll take a little bit of money from sale of web clients and we'll do some, we'll do some flipping or some real estate or whatever. Well, if you want to pick the one worst year in the last 100 years, other than maybe 1929, 2005 would be a good choice for a really bad year to start a real estate fund. But once the recession hit in 2008, we refocused the company on working just in Harrisburg and really working at community change. So our first phase was new townhomes in vacant lots. Now, one of the things that happened after Agnes flood, in the great wisdom, oh, thank you. Thank you, whoever thought that. Thanks, Dave. Of course, I got a cold yesterday. The vacant lots that were there used to be townhomes there. But what had happened after the flood of '72 is that the city or whoever had come and pushed the houses into the basements and covered them over with a little bit of dirt. And there they sat. So when we acquired these parcels, 16 parcel rebuilt new townhomes, the city graciously sold us that land. But they should have paid us to take the land. because we had to excavate down 10 feet, take away the old toilets, all the old timbers, all those things that were in there, excavate down and bring in new fill. Each one of those new townhomes, we lost about $50,000 on. Now I say, well, that's not really good business there, Hartzler. I'm surprised they let you speak. Fortunately, we were able to get a grant through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Administration for Brian Hudson. I'm sure some of you here know Brian Hudson. they had a program through the sale of their bonds that allowed for subsidy of each of those new homes, which basically paid for that remediation work. In the new townhomes, we built open floor plans, et cetera. And that was phase number one. In phase two, we were working on the renovated townhomes. So in this area, most of the homes were built in the 1900s. You can see that the great thing about this neighborhood in Harrisburg is that the homes have great bones. They're very well built, all brick structures, mostly 3-story, some 2-story. But when you gut them out and put them back together, they're great places to live. So I'm just going to cut through that quickly here. Some of the other things that were important to the project was not just the investment, but also the public infrastructure and safety. Take this out here. Safety improvements. We installed new sidewalks, historic streetlights, trees, banners. By the way, we branded the city. Old Uptown is a name we kind of came up with. So it was one thing you can do in business, unlike government or something else, is you just seize the day and do it. So the Old Uptown, we kind of created that. We created the logo and branded ourselves. Sewer water laterals, street paving, security lighting cameras, and as I mentioned, the targeted street patrols. Let's run through a few slides. You can see the before and afters. That was pretty typical condition, and that's after. Many of the homes were affected by fire, leaking roofs, no roofs, deteriorated conditions, etc. So this was one of the worst streets of Delaware, where there was initially 5 on this side of the street and 5 on the other side of the street, one of the first areas we started. And this house with the green didn't have you walk in, you could see through to the ground floor basement and through to the sky. One of those on the street, we had the interesting thing about working in an area like this, each house has its own story because they're not often owned by absentee landlords. We've purchased properties from people who were in jail. We've purchased properties from people who are deceased and from their estates, from banks and foreclosure, from absentee landlords, from people from out of state, wherever. But each one, even just acquiring the property itself, is a challenge. Recently, I think Lori went to a judo match or something to get someone to sign over their property. Was it judo or karate or something, right? Yeah. Good work. Again, when you have vacant lots like that, this is one of them where they were pushed down in and just covered over, they become magnets for trash and general decay. And this and on the corner is where our current office is. I want to pause at this slide just for a second to talk about the nature of how you change a community through investing and taking a long-term view and patient capital. Some of you will recognize on the right, this is where Little Amps is located. Anyone here been to Little Amps Coffee Shop? Yeah, quite a few. Okay. So Little Amps Coffee Shop used to be this corner store here. Now, this corner store had an illegal apartment up here, was selling loose cigarettes, all kinds of other pharmaceuticals, basically anything you needed there in the pharmaceutical realm you could get at this store. But the interesting thing about this store was, and this is really the heart of our neighborhood, this store is very profitable from an economic perspective. So when you're looking at this and trying to acquire this, the prior owner of this store lived in Hershey and had a number of these convenience stores in Harrisburg. And this is something that is in urban areas, these sort of corner convenience stores that were doing things, not paying their taxes, place for drug dealing, et cetera. But in and of itself was quite profitable, right? So I think we paid $250,000 for that property. Now, at the time, it was probably worth, as a building, was worth $50,000, maybe less. But the day we bought it, or about a week later, someone came running into our office and said, "Hey, Dave, she promised to sell me that property when she wanted to when she wanted to sell. Why'd she sell it to you?" Well, well, I'll pay you, what, $20,000 more, $50,000 more? We could have made $50,000 basically flipping that property to someone who had continued the use as sort of an illegal venture. Instead, what we did, we invested another $350,000 to turn it into Little Amps. Now, let's see, 250 plus 350 equals $600,000. Anyone think that appraises for $600,000 today? No, it does not. And it probably appraises around $200,000, $250 maybe. So there's a big gap. There's a big gap between what it cost and what the value is. Okay, and I'm going to tell you how we bridge that gap through some state subsidy, some additional state subsidy on that. But what we did from a community perspective was we transferred it from one of the worst buildings in the area to one of the best. Now it's a gathering place for people looking to do business. There's a whole artist crew. Liz Larrabee, as many of you know from Messiah, holds court there every day and with all her artists, et cetera. A great friend at MakeSpace. Any of you know Liz, you can find her at Little Amps any morning. It's a place for creativity, for business, for socializing, and it's a real amenity to the community instead of being a detriment to the community. But somebody needed to do that. Someone needed to make that change, and it didn't make economic sense to do that, right? On a pure economic basis, you wouldn't do that. I think Chad Fry's there almost every day too, right, Chad? But it's a very, probably one of the most important properties that we did. So what happened over the last 10 years since we've been doing this? The increase in property values is over $30 million. So the average price, say about $30,000, is now well over $130,000. The existing homeowners, and in this part of town, I said there's about 35% home ownership in Harrisburg generally. In this part of town, it was about 10%. Someone said 10%. That would have been correct in this area. But who had the biggest benefit was the people who owned their homes and had stayed through all those decades, through the 70s, 80s, 90s. Their home value jumped because of what we worked on. An increase of residents of over 200 residents, significantly lower crime rate, we tracked that, down 80%, decreased trash and blight, less demand on public resources, more income for local businesses, increased city revenues, mercantile taxes, earned income tax, property tax, et cetera. Now, I'm sorry to say that of that $30 million, WCI was not able to capture much of it, unfortunately. A lot of it leaked out to other owners. One of the things I would do differently, I should say, is we would have bought a lot more properties early on. One of my worst stories that I could tell myself is there were four properties on Penn Street, just around the corner from Little Amps, and at the beginning I could have bought them each for $40,000 from a gentleman who owned four of them. He was a suburban guy, a notorious landlord. He said, "Oh, I'll sell them to you for $40,000, Alex." They were worth $20,000 when we started. A few years later, we had fixed up a few properties around him, and I went back to him. I said, "Okay, I'll pay you $40,000 now." He said, "Alex, I think we're worth $60,000 now." I said, "I'm not going to buy them. I'm not going to do it." So we kept working. A few years later, I said, "Hey, now they're worth $60,000. He said, "Nope, I want 80 now." So just from four properties, had I bought them at 40, 80, 120, 160, $160,000 I made for that guy. And we bought him because we had to, because he was just letting him rot. So a lot of the value leaked away to other folks, unfortunately. That is what happened. There's a lot of numbers and math up here, but I want to just talk about the financial, just real quick on the finances. And focus maybe on the blue side over here. We got $1.5 million from PHFA. We have $3 million in RCAP funds. We've since got another RCAP grant. $250,000 from Elm Street and $100K from Growing Greener. So almost $5 million of total subsidy, which matched our $5 million of equity. We have not, as a partners in WCI, have not returned $1 to our partners in 10 years. Now we pay our staff market rates, but the patient capital here, I think it's really over the next 2 or 3 decades that there's going to be return to capital. If we were looking to make a quick profit here, was not possible, has not been possible. And we even needed subsidy to do it, even with the patient capital. The problems and the issues are, you have the value deficit environment, you have the free rider problem, the speculators I talked about One more quick story on that. There was one guy who saw what we were doing and came in and bought properties proactively, and then called Dave and said, hey, I bought 2 properties for you. You might want to buy them from me. That's nice. Thank you. Unfortunately, ultimately, we had to do it, at least one of them. There's a fixed lower band market. Slum properties have some value, and there's a fixed sort of upper band where, because of the tax situation in Harrisburg, it's very hard to sell them for more than about $215,000. But what I want to talk about this morning is a little bit, just have you think about and maybe go into discussion is, why does this problem exist in Harrisburg? And Harrisburg, let me say, it's not unique. There's many, I think there's 23 distressed municipalities in the state of Pennsylvania who are in Act 47. Why does this exist? And I argue that at its very fundamental level, there's lots of tax reasons. We have very high school property taxes. There's urban decay issues, white flight, there's racism, all these different things that have been historically. But I actually think it's much more fundamental than that. It's what we think about Harrisburg, that we allow it. We as a community, we as Christian business people, just as business people in general, community people, we allow this to exist. We had a group here when Harrisburg was considering bankruptcy. We had a group from Tokyo, Japan, film crew. Flew over from Tokyo, came up from DC with their local anchor, and they spent a week in Harrisburg. And they filmed in this area, Allison Hill. They came to our house. They tried to show both sides, and we were, I guess I'm big in Japan, like to say. But we sat down with the crew for a couple hours at the beginning and at the end, and said, well, what did you learn about Harrisburg? And they said, well, it's a place of, we cannot believe how bad it is in certain areas, and we also can't believe how hopeful it is in other areas. But the fundamental thing they said is, this would never happen in Japan. We just wouldn't allow it. We just don't have it. Now think about that for a minute. That society, that culture, the Japanese culture, just wouldn't allow Allison Hill to exist. Right? Why do we allow it to exist? And it's a mind share, right? We think it's okay. And then what does that do to us? Well, if Harrisburg's bad and my neighbor's not fixing up his property, do I need to fix up my property? Yeah, I'll get to it, you know. Some of those properties that were there, if they were next to you on your block in Camp Hill or Enola, Hershey, Lancaster, you wouldn't allow that, right? You wouldn't allow that to go on next to you. You'd buy it, or you'd go to the borough council, you protest, or you'd call the mayor, the police, hey, this guy's allowing his property to be run down. Maybe you'd volunteer and go cut the grass, right? Or maybe you'd paint it or whatever. The original idea, actually, for doing this came from an article I read in CNN.com. It was called Paint Your Neighbor's House, something I did in East LA that group got together and worked on community revitalization by going around and in this current community and painting their neighbors' houses, those who couldn't afford it, right? So they were doing revitalization, but they were getting together with the neighbors and painting their houses. We have to think about that. We allow this to go on right next door, a few miles from here. And I'd argue we have the ability to change it too if we want to. So how am I doing on time? Where's Dan? How are we? Ready for some questions? 15? Perfect. Okay. So what I'd like to just discuss is on that. What is the role of Christian business people in making change in our local community? And what I want to focus on is that there's 2 models. This is I'm going to bring back the META model for a second. Talk about impact investing. What impact investing means is that I'm going to do something on a business platform. WCI is run as a business. We think business first. But we have a second goal. So we have 2 bottom lines. One is we need to make a little bit of money to pay our bankers. And I see Tom Breams back there. And Tom, we do pay our loans. Tom can attest to it. We need to run this company as a business so we can pay our loans and pay our staff and all those things. We're going to run it as a business first. But we have a second goal, which is to create community change. Okay. Now, and think about this at your tables. The traditional model has been, and some people will argue very strenuously that this should still be a model. Hartzler's got it all wrong. META is actually wrong. this combining of social community goals with business goals makes both worse. That'd be the argument. What we really should do is we should create as much profit in our businesses as possible and then give the money away to charity, and then the charity should take care of it. Okay, so that's the traditional model. And there are eloquent defenders of that position today. And so I think I'm not obviously, you know where I'm at. But I do respect that there's another view that, this Hartz is up here talking. If he wants to go fix Harrisburg, let him do it. It has nothing to do with me, right? So take about 5 minutes or so, discuss it a little bit, and let's see if we get some questions going on that topic. So let's get some feedback and flesh out that a little bit more. Questions, further discussion? Well, just raise your hand. We'll want to share with the group. I know, Chris, you had one. If you want to, do you want to lead with that? No?
We were talking at our table about the perceived displacement of a lot of lower income families from Midtown Harrisburg with the influx of younger people and sort of the development of a pampered hipster class in Midtown. I live in Midtown, so maybe I'm part of the problem. But I'm hearing that a lot of lower income families who used to live in some of these areas are now pushed out, and Lemoyne and New Cumberland and the growth of Section 8 rentals in some of these traditional West Shore communities. Now I think the school districts in those communities are dealing with a problem that used to be concentrated in Harrisburg.
Yeah, and our response to that, we hear that, and we actually, I guess that's part of the caught in the middle battle that we fight about why are we there, and then if we are there, maybe we shouldn't be. But my response to that is a very simple one. Harrisburg had about 100,000 residents in 1950. We have less than 50,000 now. So even if we go back up to 100,000, and by the way, Harrisburg slightly increased from 2000 to 2010 by 700 residents. So on that rate, it'll take about 500 years to get back to 100,000 people. So my view is there's plenty of room for everybody, but that's the response. But Chris is absolutely right. It tends to be there's a group that, and I don't want to characterize too much, but it tends to be a group that is they see the national trends of gentrification and use that as a epithet against us. But it's a good point. We're very mindful of. And the fact of the matter is, even in this little community here, we have a wide variety of rental rates, housing rates. You can buy a house for about $100,000. You can buy a house for $220,000, and so it's quite a mixed community in and of itself. Yes, sir.
We have the same problem in York, and Alex, I'm just curious if you would comment on, because there's a correlation between the problems that we have in the city with the schools. I mean, we're we're about to charterize our entire school district. We're the 499th worst school district in the state. And so you've got folks who are willing to live here, but the school issue, it just is terrible.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue, and my friends, the Bryces here, can attest to that. Or one of my earliest friends in Harrisburg, who moved to the suburbs partly for schools, and yeah, right. But no, if I think of my wife and I's friends who've been in the city for 20 years, most of us have moved out. We're still there, but my son's only 4 months old, so yeah. Look, the schools are a big issue. And we're not going to solve that problem overnight. My argument would be is that we can do projects like this while we're fixing the schools. Okay, so I don't think it's an either or. I think you can do them in parallel. I try not to get into the school discussion, because if you get into the school discussion, that's all you talk about. People don't realize in Harrisburg the budget for the city schools is 3 times the budget for the municipal budget. So it's think of that, 3 times. So there's a lot more money being spent on schools than there is on police and fire. So it's a big issue. I actually think that my favorite answer to that is you do what Louisville did. Louisville, Kentucky disbanded their city schools in the 1980s, early 80s, and gave them all to the suburban schools. Now, if I propose that and push that through, I better run very quickly away from Central PA, right? But you know, there are problems. I just had the pleasure of talking with Gene Vino, our financial recovery officer, this week, and talking about some of those issues. So we need to work on that. But I think you can work on things like this in parallel. There's lots of people. We're only 10% of the community writ large. There are plenty of young people, empty nesters, families without kids, families who are okay with private school, who will live in an urban environment regardless of the schools. So that's my. Probably anything but what we have currently. Other questions or observations, comments? Two great points.
Okay, so something we talked about at our table was like, how could we as like sort of smaller Christian businesses, I guess, and people that don't have as much time and resources maybe as you do, sort of help out the Harrisburg community, maybe as not having as much like capital or like enough money to have that type of risk, and don't have time to like have our capital come back like 30 years maybe. So how we could give like the most amount of money for the most amount of like gain in the community that might not be like buying houses, but could be used in other ways.
No, and that's a great point. My internal clock was going off as my time was up, but it's a fantastic point. And Messiah College, I got to say, has been very much a part of doing exactly that. There are a number of small business folks who have started in Harrisburg. There's Little Amps. There's a guy doing ice cream, Urban Churn. Yellowbird. There's now an improv theater on 3rd Street, which is fantastic. There's, excuse me, I mentioned Liz Larrabee with her artist studio. There's a lot of small little things that you can do. Just coming in and renting an apartment, being part of the urban environment is a huge plus. I think that of all the local universities that support Harrisburg, Messiah is voting with their feet in a lot of ways. A lot of their graduates are coming in and being part of the solution. So that's absolutely critical. So Harrisburg is one of those weird capital cities where we don't really have a university who's in our jurisdiction. You think of Austin, Texas, or Madison, Wisconsin, places like that. Penn State Harrisburg is a little mistake of history in that it's down in Middletown on an old Army base, right, Air Force base. And if that decision had been made differently, the city could look a whole lot differently if Penn State Harrisburg was actually in Harrisburg, not Middletown. But Messiah, and notwithstanding, Messiah and other, having those young people come in, start little businesses, make their life there, versus going out into a garden apartment makes a huge difference. And it's very much noticed and appreciated. Thanks.
One of the principles we use in church planning, I'm a pastor, is finding a person of peace. And a lot of time, as you are on the outskirts of things, it's hard to figure out, where do I go, where do I start? And finding that person of peace who was already in the area, who has a heart for the area, is a great way to connect. And for us, we are right in Allison Hill. We're right on 15th and Market, which is kind of the epicenter of it all. And so we become that person of peace to make the connections. We're there because we have a heart for the city. And you have a heart for the city as well, and otherwise you wouldn't be here. And so as we are able to work together and see that vision, not for, again, we've talked about this a lot, not for making a profit necessarily financially, but as all of us here are more focused on eternal gain rather than present and earthly gain, we are making an eternal impact, whether this person comes to Christ or at least gets to know about Christ. And I think that's essentially what we want to do. I like what my friend said here. There are times where 30 years you still get nothing in return. But the joy of seeing a life improve for the better becomes its own reward.
Thank you. Dan, do we have time for one more? Or?
to avoid like the gentrification and the issue of pushing out people that cannot afford to take part in the revitalization that's happening, that you're doing that piece of it. What about bringing in other organizations that would be like META, that would be giving incentive or training or expertise, maybe in technology or other skills that the current population there can learn and can be a part of, that would allow them to take part in the revitalization and to take part in learning skills that give them a hand up, that teach them something they can put back in the community as well. What kind of partnerships could or be with your organization that have that vision that you do too, to see the community revitalized?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, certainly job training, education, those types of skills are very important, and working with populations that are already there is important. We could do a whole another morning if you want to come back for just on the gentrification topic, because it's something that we debate almost on a daily basis, and it comes down to for us a point is, why do we allow concentrated poverty to go on? The New York Times just did a whole study. It was reported this past summer, I believe, about how to break that and which areas of the country have the most mobility. Okay, so if you, regardless of what your parents' income was, do you have a chance to advance in the United States? And look at different regions where they have mobility. So the idea isn't that where you start; it's about what mobility do you have. And what the study showed was that areas that have mobility and don't have concentrated poverty have more mobility. So really, this idea that there is some low-income housing going on the West Shore and East Shore, I say great, that's great, right? We shouldn't be isolating ourselves in our little communities that I only know people who look like me and who have the same income as me or things like that. You actually want a diverse group because then you learn from each other and you learn both ways. And so I think it's the communication is job training, education, all those things. But I actually think integrating in a diverse community is really a key. That we haven't had that in Harrisburg. We've had a separated community, and so I think breaking down some of those barriers, having a more integrated community, will actually help all of us in the longer term. So that'd be my premise on that. Dan.
Also, a word of thanks to META for your sponsorship of this event. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you very much. And thank you all for coming out this morning. Very happy to have a good turnout this morning for this session. I wanted to take a moment to also thank all of the alumni volunteers that helped make this event possible.